Aaron, great to see you. So I'm excited to do this. We're going to actually take and start from scratch and build a financial model from a blank sheet. Before we go, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about your business. Give me the elevator pitch, and then we'll dig in a little bit more the inner workings of who your customer is, how they pay you, what your expectations are around those things, so we can understand the business better, which will then help us build a more accurate model.
Okay. So stormwater is the number one cause of water pollution in urban areas. And in the United States, we generate about 32 trillion gallons of stormwater runoff every year. We've developed very small sensors that monitor temperature and flow of water moving through subsurface sewer and storm sewer lines. And we take that data in real time, transmit it to the cloud, and then download it to our customers' apps, where they can see the data visualizations and basically get an understanding of how their entire system's operating. So it's like a neurosystem for sewers, which right now are millions of miles of black box. We primarily sell to municipalities.
And a typical city would have how many of these locations?
About 200. So
we have a SaaS solution that has some initial cost of the hardware. How much does that piece of hardware that you provide with the $560 subscription, what does that cost you to produce?
Right now, one-off, we're spending about $300 per sensor.
So one of the key things to building a financial model is understanding what your base unit is. And let me give you an example. When I was building the payroll company, Sure Payroll, and I built my first model, I thought the base unit was customers. Because with a customer, I knew how much revenue there was, I knew how much customer support there was, it seemed perfect. But I couldn't figure out what drove customers and sales reps, and it got confusing. And the aha moment was when I realized that the base unit was sales rep. Because if I added a sales rep, I knew exactly how much cost I added, I knew exactly how many customers they would bring in, which drove how much revenue and how much cost. And so our business really was all about how many sales reps could we afford to hire. So anytime we had 70 grand in the bank, we hired another sales rep. And that's how we grow our top line. And it became a really simple model once you understood that. Before that, it was very complicated. So for you, we have to understand what the base unit model is. And it's probably not a sensor. That's too granular, and you're not going to drive it. So it's probably a city, probably have different size cities, something like small, medium, large. Tell me a little bit about your customer acquisition.
So far, it's all been inbound.
What activities are you doing that is generating more inbound?
There are trade publications. LinkedIn is a very big focus area for these guys. And conferences. A lot of them talk to each other. So it's a very close-knit community, stormwater.
All right. So let's get started. Name the tab, the monthly income statement, because that's where we're going to start, is with a monthly income statement. We'll start with January of 18, go like forever. Let's go all the way out to cell A, and let's say revenue. And then under it, we're going to have three kinds of revenue. We're going to have small city, medium city, big city. Let's do a freeze panes. We'll start with September, the upcoming month. So the challenge is, what are we going to put in this cell? We have to come up with some formula that is going to tell us what the revenue for small cities is in September. Well, in order to do that, we're going to have to know how many small cities we have. We're going to have to know what our revenue per small city is. If we have those two numbers, we're probably pretty good, right? So we're going to have to do two things now. One is we're going to have an assumptions tab, because we're going to put a whole bunch of assumptions in. And then two is we're not going to do all the math on this spreadsheet that figures out how many customers we have in each category. We're going to have that on a detail tab. Let's make some assumptions around pricing. Let's create a little section called pricing there. And then now below it, we're going to have, let's do small city, medium city, large city. And in this case, our pricing may change over time, right? Mm-hmm. And you can make that be a formula. So if you're small city, if you want to say a small city is 200 sensors, then in parentheses, make small city parentheses 200. And then in there, you could say equals 200 times what your price is, right? Do you have the same price per sensor relatively? So here you could say equals 50 times whatever your price is per sensor, right? Okay, and now on the medium, we'll change it to 200. And by putting this as a formula, you're showing the user where this came from, right? And it's not just a random number. Perfect. And then let's have a monthly pricing, and then we can just equal what's on the left divided by 12. Perfect. So let's shade those. So now we know that anything that is in a shaded green as an input, everything else is going to be a formula. All right? Great. So we now know something about pricing. But we're also going to need to know how many of these things we have. So let's create another tab. And we're going to call this customer details. Fine. So go to the monthly income statement. And what I want to do is I want to get all the same months lined up on the customer details tab. So what we'll do is instead of copying and pasting, because we may change it later, go to B2, say equals, and then go to B2 on that statement, on that page, and hit enter. And now if you take that and copy all the way across, you should get all the hard work that you did on the previous page. Yep. So now if we change the date range on our monthly income statement, it'll change on there. We're going to do this on every single sheet so that we only have one master, one place we label it. So what do we want in here? So the goal of this is to figure out how many small cities we have. So how are we going to do that? We have to know how many we had previous month, how many we lost, and how many we gained. How many do you think are going to be paying in September?
So for the small, medium, large cities, we're starting with pilots. So it's about 5 to 10 units per city, no matter the size.
What if we did this as the sales funnel? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how many new pilots we get in on the first line. We're going to be able to account for some revenue while it's a pilot. We'll have an assumption about how many pilots turn into real, and we'll have an assumption about how many months they take to turn into real. And then that will all drive how many full customers we have. Okay, let's label this row new pilots. So now how many new pilots are we going to have in September? 3. Perfect. Now let's have total pilots. That's going to equal how many total pilots we had in the previous month, plus how many new pilots, right? We have to do something about knowing that the pilots are going to come off. They're going to end. Can we make an assumption about 3 months for a pilot? I want to have how many pilots we started with, how many pilots we gained, how many pilots we lost, and then how many we finished with. So let's relabel these. So now what we're going to do is we know that we ended August with 0 pilots. So let's put zeros in for August for everything because we had zeros all the way across. Yep, great. In September, though, you think you're going to have 3 new pilots. Mm-hmm. Beginning of the month pilot equals the end of the month from the prior one, right? Mm-hmm. Added this month, we think we're going to have 3. We're cheating and hard coding. We're going to try to get it to be a formula. Concluded this month, and this is going to equal the number of pilots that we started 3 months ago. So the number that conclude in September or the number that started in June. And then end of month active pilots should equal the starting plus the new minus the ended. We're going to basically do the same thing, beginning of month, added, churned, and end, but instead of pilots, they're going to be full paid. Great. Now we need to do one other thing, which is we need to have an assumption around what percentage of the pilots turn into deployments. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to our assumptions page. It might vary from small, medium, and large. Do you think it will, or is it constant across all of them?
For purposes of now, I think constant is.
Okay, so label it pilot to deployment conversion. And now this will be a percentage. Put in what you think it's going to be. Now we're going to do one other trick. We're going to label this field by using the label function in the upper left-hand corner. Now what's going to happen is if we go back to customer detail, what we can do is in September, the beginning deployments equals the end of deployments from the last one. And now deployments added this month is going to equal the conversion rate times how many have concluded. Yep. As we paste this forward, that conversion rate will automatically pull from the conclusions will automatically pull from the starts, and it's all going to, right? Now we also need to know, we don't have deployments concluded, we'll change that to deployments churned. Let's go to the assumptions, create another row, yep, and this is going to be the monthly deployment churn rate. Yep. And what percentage do you think are going to churn on average?
Yeah, so our contracts are 3 years.
You have 3-year contracts?
Mm-hmm. The city contracts work easily that way.
Okay. We may not need to do churn in the same way then. Let's do churn a little differently. So what I would do is I would do a renewal rate and I would look back 3 years for the moment, because we're only doing a 5-year model. The first 3 years you're gonna have none. What we're gonna do is we're gonna look back to who started 3 years ago and then have a renewal rate on that. Call it contract renewal rate. Yep, and now what percentage do you think will renew? Okay, well, let's call this contract renewal rate. Let's go back to customer detail. All right, we're not gonna have to deal with this for 3 years yet. Let's leave it blank for the moment. We'll go the end of month deployments, which equals the beginning of the month plus the new ones that were added, right? So we can copy all these cells across, except we plugged in a hard number for the pilots added this month. And this is where we have to spend a bunch of time, which is understanding what levers we have that are gonna get us more pilots. Let's create another tab, and we're gonna call it marketing detail. So the first thing we wanna do is we wanna copy that whole row that we put on customer detail that did all the months and everything for us. And it still should be referring to our master, which was on the monthly. So again, if we change the monthly income statement, it would change all the way through. Just start listing over here some of the marketing activities that you think you should be doing. All right, insert a row above conferences. Let's just call it lead generation. And then what we're gonna end up doing is copying all this stuff again below, and we're gonna call it related expenses. So we probably need some assumptions for these things, how many leads we get out of a conference, the expenses related. And what's ultimately gonna happen is you're gonna look at this and you're gonna say, wow, if I do more conferences, it costs me more money, but I get more customers and I can see the output on my income statement, right? Let's take conferences. All right, let's go to the assumptions tab, and then let's say cost of attending a conference. And we can put in a cost. Great. And let's give it a label. Yep. The next thing we want to have is expected leads per conference. Yep. Great. And then conversion rate of conference leads. Yep. Below that, in the label in 15A, yeah, put customer acquisition cost, conferences. Let's do some math. The $5,000 divided by the 60 times that. And so at this rate, you're basically paying $833 per lead. And now as we change your cost, so change your conference cost to $6,000. Oh crap, it now costs me $1,000 per customer, right? Let's use these numbers to decide how many pilots we ultimately got. So let's go to our marketing detail. So we have lead generation and we have expenses, but we want to have a section that has the actual leads that we're going to get. We're going to do it by conferences. We're going to do it by LinkedIn. We're going to do the same thing over and over. Let's insert a couple of rows between 4 and 5. So how many conferences do you think you're going to go to in August? Yep. What we want to know is how many leads did we get out of it? The next thing will be pilots. So how do we know how many leads do we get in August? And what's it equal? Well, how many conferences we went to times, yep, you could go there, leads per conference, yep, and hit enter. And then how many pilots do you get equals how many leads you had times, is it conversion rate?
Conversion rate of conference leads.
Yep. And that makes sense. And by the way, if you go to 2 conferences, those numbers should double. Look at that. This is your input, so that should be green. How long does it take for a conference lead to actually turn into a pilot?
About 4 months.
Move this pilots 4 months to the right. So the conferences you went into August generated leads that will turn up as pilots here. Copy that cell and paste it, and I think it'll reference 4 months prior, which is perfect. You should have 0 pilots coming out of that. Let's take these 3, highlight them and drag them over to the right. So start playing with your number of conferences. So how many conferences do you think you're going to go to? And we should see that then in the subsequent out months is when the results happen, right? And there's that 4-month delay. But now what we should be able to do is go to our customer detail, and for the number of new pilots added this month, instead of it being a 3, it should reference the answer from the marketing detail, because marketing drives your pilots. So how many new pilots do we get in September? It'll say 0 there. And now if we take these columns and draw them out to December, and that's the result of the hard work that you did when you went to a conference in September. And now we'll have to backfill this to make it right because you think you have 3 that are going to convert today from work you did prior. You can see that if I go to more conferences, I'm going to get more pilots. And by the way, more pilots are going to create more customers. Mm-hmm. We did this thing with deployment. So now if we drag this out to like way out into 19, and what we should see, if we did it right, and maybe we didn't, because it should have picked up that 12 at some point. Oh, it was ones concluded. So take these and drag them out further to the right, because we have to get concluding pilots, which will then get us, so, aha, now we're getting customers. What happened was we had 12 pilots that started. So we had 12, 12, 12. Those 12 concluded. And when they concluded, 80% of them turned into customers. When these 12 concluded, 80% of them turned into customers. So now we're starting to predict the future. Now that we know how many customers we have, how many actual deployments, let's go back to our income statement. And you're probably going to tweak it by medium, small, and big ultimately. I'm going to simplify this differently. Let's make it be pilot revenue and full deployment revenue for the moment, just to make this simpler. We need some assumptions around what pilot revenue is. So call it pilot revenue, big city, and we'll kill row 7. We had not given these labels yet, had we? So now let's give it a label that says pilot annual pricing, and then we'll call it deployment annual pricing. And then let's do pilot monthly pricing and deployment monthly pricing for the other 2. Awesome. Now let's go back to our monthly income statement. So September's pilot revenue equals how many pilots we have in September, which is in our customer detail, end of month active pilots, times, and you can just start typing pilot monthly pricing. Yep. And then your deployment revenue equals, and let's figure out how many deployments we have at the end of September, times deployment monthly pricing. And now copy those guys out. Let's go pretty far out. So we've got a problem. And the problem is not, there we go. Look, we're getting revenue. We have to consistently decide how far out we're going. Okay, let's build out one more of these AdWords. So let's say AdWords spend. Great. Let's go back to our assumptions and let's make an assumption around the cost per click. So let's say AdWords average cost per click. So what do you pay? Okay. And then let's below it have an AdWords conversion rate to lead. And what percentage of the people do you think that click are actually going to become a lead? Great. We did that customer acquisition cost. Let's rename that to be cost per pilot. And now down here, let's do the same kind of math. So let's do AdWords conversion lead to pilot. Let's just say 10% for the moment. Let's below that do the math and say acquisition cost per pilot. So cost divided by, how many leads are we going to get, times 10%. Yep, $100 per lead. If you looked at this, you'd say, I should spend all my money on AdWords. But there are only 800 people in the world who can click on this thing.
Exactly.
So where you could go wrong in this model is if you said, well, according to the model, it's cheaper to go AdWords. I'm just going to spend $10,000 a month in AdWords. You can't get that many clicks. And so we're going to have to artificially cap it somehow to be reflective of how big that market is. All right, we didn't label these guys. We probably should. Yep. Great. Yep. Okay, now we can go back to our marketing detail. We got an AdWords spend. So then based on that AdWords spend, the next thing is how many clicks did we buy? So AdWords visits, so these are visits to the website. We have to do AdWords leads. So let's just say, how much do you want to spend in September? Let's fill it in with a number just so we have something. And we think if we did this right, that should get us 1 lead. So how many visits do we get for that $100? How much we spend divided by the AdWords cost per click. So let's format it, as a number. And that makes sense. At 20 cents a click, we get 5 per dollar. So if you spend $100, we'll get 500 left. How many leads will we get? Well, that equals how many clicks we had times AdWords conversion to lead. One more here, AdWords pilots And that equals how many leads times AdWords conversion lead to pilot. And now we can copy those all the way over to the right. And you can see that as you spend more, you get more leads. That was just pilots from conferences. Let's insert a couple rows here and let's create one that's called total new pilots. And that won't be in green because it's going to be a sum. Oh, by the way, you want to make row 13 be green because how many dollars you spend each month is going to be yeah. And now the total new pilots equals, oh, but is there a delay from lead to pilot? Do we need to play the same 4 months? We probably do.
I would say so, yes.
So let's correct that row. So instead of K, it's going to be H. The number of pilots come from how many we did in June. So now if you copy that guy to the right, it should start 4 months after we got our first pilot. Let's copy the total new pilots over to the right. And now what we should do is we should reference row 18 when we're looking for pilots. So go to the customer detail, and on the row that has pilots added this month, that should be marketing detail 18, because 18 is the row that includes the total, so it'll include all of the ones. Now when we go back to our marketing detail, and now you can build out each of these, what LinkedIn I do, what Instagram I do, what industry I do, all of it will roll down into the total. The total drives into your customers. The customers are going to drive into your revenue, right? And it's all going to work. So let's go back to marketing. Let's do the related expenses. So we have to account for cost in all of this stuff. So let's do conferences. So let's start with September. The expense for conferences equals how many conferences we do times the cost per conference. Yep. So it's 0. Copy it 1 to the right. Look at that. It's $10,000. We should format those as dollars. Perfect. Cost of AdWords is really simple because we already input it up top. Yep. And let's create a total marketing expense equals, let's do a sum of everything between AdWords and conferences. When you fill in all of those other cells, they'll automatically come into the total. Yeah, do all of it and drag it out. Now we're starting to get some costs for conferences, some costs from this. Now let's go back to our income statement. We're gonna have to account for some of your cost of goods sold. Let's skip a line and go to gross profit, and go to the left and talk about expenses, right? We covered some of the basics. And now we have to make a strategic decision. And let's talk about marketing expenses for a minute and where you wanna categorize them. Clearly, when you sell a product and you have a cost of goods sold, so you have a cost of that piece of hardware you're shipping, and you have a cost of probably doing some training and installation, that cost is going to be built in so that you can get a gross profit. The question is, do you want to lump marketing in with all of your what I call indirect expenses? Or do you want to separate it out and get a sense for how much am I spending on acquiring new customers? And then how much am I getting for it? And then the rest is really indirect, because marketing is sort of, it's a hybrid. It's not a direct cost, it's not an indirect cost. So I tend to put that above the line. So if I were going to do this, what I would do is I would get to your gross profit number, that's good. And then what I would do is I'd get some marketing costs. You have to decide what level of detail you want to have in here, because we have all the detail in the marketing detail. That gets you a total marketing. So now we get to a contribution margin. On an ongoing basis, this is how much my business is making that's going to contribute to all the fixed expenses. Some people argue that marketing shouldn't be before contribution margin. Some people put it after. I like it before. Then we can get rid of this row because marketing expenses is already taken care of. And now let's just fill in. So total marketing, we have some marketing numbers. Total marketing expense, there it is. Yep. Let's fill in the totals, the ones that are all formulas. So gross profit, that equals the sum of our revenues minus cost of goods sold. So contribution margin, let's make that a formula. So that's going to be gross profit minus total of marketing. Awesome. Oh, our gross profit was 0 because we didn't have any sales. It'll come out great. Now we can see that we're starting to get some contribution margin. We're starting to get some marketing expenses, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about your hardware. So we need to go to the assumptions page. I need one assumption about the cost of hardware. So cost per sensor, current cost, okay. And we'll label it. And then we need to know the number of sensors per pilot and the number of sensors per deployment. And these are just averages. Okay, so we have some new assumptions. Now let's go to our income statement. We don't have on here how many pilots and how many deployments we have. We just have the dollars. So we could do this a couple of ways. One is we could echo from our customer detail onto here and do some math. Or we could just do the math on the customer detail and then bring that forward. And I think that's right. This is all about how many pilots, but let's do this. So I want to calculate number of new sensors, then I want to have the cost of sensors for pilots. To find the number of new sensors for pilots, it's equal to the number of new pilots times sensors per pilot. The cost of sensors for pilot is equal to that number we just calculated times cost per sensor. So if we do 13 new pilots, we'll have 130 new sensors, and that'll cost us $32,000, right? And then let's do the same thing with deployments. So that's going to equal deployments added this month times sensors per deployment. Cost of them is going to equal that number times cost per sensor. Oh, we have deployments all the time. Okay, got it. Great. Let's go to our income statement. So the cost of goods sold now equals, we'll go over to customer detail, and it's equal to the September cost of pilots plus, and there it is. Yep, cut into our gross profit, which is correct. Now, let's do a couple of things. So on this monthly income statement, let's make this go out. We started in 18, we want 19, 20, 21, 22. Let's go all the way to December 22. So let's do the same thing on customer detail. Now let's do it with marketing. Now let's look at our monthly income statement. We have some big numbers in there. Let's go look at marketing and see what happened. Your conferences were going up. You're doing 60 conferences a month. So let's just say you want to average one conference a month. Go to this next one, and I'd say equals that one. It always equals the predecessor. If you ever want to say, I think we should be doing 2 conferences a month now, you just put a 2 in that month, and everything to the right will be 2, etc. So go to the monthly income statement. Seems more reasonable. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to roll this up annually. I want to cheat. Let's go to customer detail, and let's just copy row 2, and then let's paste row 2 in the annual income statement in row 2. The other thing I want to do is in columns A and B, we have a bunch of stuff in the monthly income statement, and I want that same stuff in the annual income statement. We're going to have years, not months up here. Format that row as text. Perfect. All right. So that equals the sum of January through December 2018 on our monthly income statement. So we have to actually do each of the top ones. Yep. And then same thing here. Now what we can do is copy and paste those. And let's do it a row at a time so that we don't have all those zeros and stuff. So copy that. Yep, you can do that. Do it that way. That's fine. So one of the things that's interesting is your pilot revenue is very flat because your only real source is conferences, and you're doing the same number of conferences every month.
Right.
So of course it's not changing. Your deployment revenue is growing by basically about the same amount every year. We added 8 million and we added 8 million because it's only coming from pilots that are converting. Now what I want to do is I want you to open a second window, and this one we're going to put on our annual income statement. And that one we're going to put on the assumptions. And now let's do some things. So let's say that your conversion rate is actually only 5%. Do you see how that just took everything down?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that your cost per click goes up to $1. That didn't have a big effect because we didn't spend very much there, right? Let's say that your cost per sensor changes. So now we're going to look at your contribution margin. So here you were losing money. There you're making a bunch of money. But if your cost per sensor goes down to $100, we're going to be losing less, making a bunch more, right? This is the basics of where we start to get to.
That's very cool.
The hard part is that we have to fill in the rest of these. We have to get a cash balance. But I hope that what we've done today so far is we've started to build out the revenue side. We've started to build out the income statement. We've given examples of how we have activities that will drive that revenue. We now know, by the way, it's not a single assumption, but if we go over to our marketing detail, if we start spending more on doing more than one conference, so watch the impact of this. If we just change that 1 to a 2, and we're going to do 2 conferences a month from there forward, our $12 million in gross profit is going to become $21 million in gross profit. Sort of makes sense. You have almost twice as many because that's your sole source of leads. But this is the stuff that you have to build out so that you can start doing this what if, and that you can start seeing the future. The reason I started on September is I want you to try to put real numbers in. Each month as you get the real numbers, it's so, so, so important that you update your assumptions to try to make September look as close to what September actuals were. And then you'll hard code in the September actuals, right? Type them over so they're not formulas anymore, shade it. And then going forward, it should be more reflective of the actual future. And if you do this consistently, you will have such control because you will understand what are the levers, what's working, what's not working, and how to grow your business.